Greetings, and welcome to a roundtable rendition of Careful Conversations, a program made possible by the collaborative efforts of AARP Colorado and Dementia Friendly Denver. My name is Jane Barton. I'm honored to serve as the caregiving ambassador for AARP Colorado, as well as a co-host for this roundtable discussion today. I'm the founder of Cardinal LLC, and as such, I serve as a speaker, writer, and a listener, specializing in the areas of aging, illness, and end-of-life care, as well as caregiving. So as you can imagine, I am very excited today about this roundtable discussion about the real and raw issues about caregiving in our society. I'm also very thrilled to be co-hosting with Lori LeMasters and our fabulous guest today. Before diving into our conversation, allow me to introduce the amazing people around this table. First, it's my delight and privilege to be co-hosting the roundtable and discussion with Lori. Lori LeMasters is the founder of Care Partners Resource, a free membership website to assist family caregivers with the daily challenges of caring for a loved one. She works with professional and family caregivers to identify their needs as a caregiver, to understand feelings of burnout, and to create practical, effective plans for self-care. Currently, Lori is on the steering committee for Dementia Friendly Denver, and it is Lori's passion for caregivers that served as the catalyst to convene this roundtable discussion today, a compassionate and beneficial conversation about the journey of caregiving. So thank you, Lori. I would also like to welcome and introduce Nadine Roberts Cornish. She founded the Caregivers Guardian in 2009. She has an extensive background in public health education and served as an independent consultant for 15 years with California's Department of Health Services, where she provided expertise on some of the state's most innovative social marketing campaigns. For the past 8 years, she has care managed, consulted with, and supported caregivers across the country. So thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.
And I would also like to welcome Dr. Paul Ramsey. He is the executive director of A Little Help. He has over 25 years of experience building organizations and promoting positive social change. He is passionate about the mission of A Little Help, connecting volunteers with their senior neighbors to help them stay and thrive in their homes. He has served as the chair and vice chair of Denver's Commission on Aging and served on its advocacy committee. He currently serves as the vice chair of the National Village to Village Network's Board of Directors, as well as the Strategic Growth Committee. So welcome. Now that you know a little bit about who's around the table, it's time to consider and discuss some important questions about the caregiving journey. Lori, could you share a bit about the caregiving survey that was developed and it was conducted in preparation for this discussion before posing our first question for our guest?
Sure. Thank you, Jane. So when I began thinking about this discussion, it was extremely important to focus on actual daily challenges that caregivers face. We felt in order to hear from many caregivers from all over, all walks of life and all walks of caregiving, it was important that we get a large audience. So we sent this survey to constituents from Parkinson Association of the Rockies, Alzheimer's Association of Colorado, A Little Help, and many of the caregivers that Jane and I have had the privilege of meeting in our speaking throughout over the years. And so today's discussion is based on many of those common challenges. Let's start with the first question. So asking and receiving help, as we all know, is really difficult, and it really is extremely challenging for caregivers. DJ from Denver stated that it's really hard for her to accept and ask for help from family members or friends because she took that lead role when caring for her parents, and then she said she felt a little guilt with regards to then reaching back out and asking for help. It becomes extremely difficult for caregivers when guilt is part of the equation. So how can we help and motivate caregivers of caring for those folks that are ill, or also our aging community, to ask for help and to seek help from not only their family and friends, but from professionals?
Lori, that is probably the number one issue with caregivers, their reluctance to ask for help or even accept help once it's offered. So one of the things that I do with the caregivers that I work with is really challenge them to reframe the whole idea of caregiving and caregiving solo as opposed to caregiving in community. That just as you hear the African adage, it takes a village. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to take care of anyone, and that it really shouldn't be a solo exercise. And so I invite them to consider reframing and inviting family members, inviting loved ones, community members, church members, etc., to participate in the process by allowing them to offer whatever it is that they can offer to support in the process. Because just as the caregiver is enriched in the process of caring for a loved one, they're also depleted. Allow others to participate in that process so that others can be enriched from the experience as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and I think that guilt and anger usually are the things that are right in front of us, and in a family system, we're usually more adept at dealing with that poorly.
Yes.
And so I think the idea of seeing that you can't see the forest through the trees, and so moving above a bit and maybe with a trusted confidant, working out what the most beautiful picture would look like for your family or for your support system for that particular individual or couple, and then developing the team and letting go of some of the pettiness or the guilt or the things that we maybe seem more immediate for the whole, for the love, for the what would be the real stronger motivations and would be the most positive outcome. I think to do that for the individual caregiver and for that support system, you're developing a team and a network, and you're also moving out of some of the habits that can get us isolated or that can form, that can just further decimate a family system. And nothing is worse than a burnout, bitter caregiver or a guilt-ridden caregiver. There's not. I mean, it's a really tough spot to be in. They're doing it out of some real positives, but it's so easy to kind of move into the ditch on that.
You mentioned the word isolation. And sometimes I get a pushback when I talk to caregivers. Like you, I try to encourage people to share in the responsibilities of that care. And some people will push back and say, but I don't have anybody to ask. There is no one. And I will say, well, what about friends? And I say, well, you know, they've kind of faded away. And so how can we help them to reconnect? Or how can we encourage their former community to reconnect and understand perhaps why they did fade away?
I think one of the best trainings I ever attended was actually conducted by none other than Jane Barton, but it was the Share the Care training, and introducing that concept to families of inviting all of the people who cared once upon a time, who even who are long distance, to participate in the process of sharing the care and bringing to the table whatever it is that you're able to offer. If you're long distance, well, maybe it's resources that you can offer in the process, or maybe you can do some of the administrative work or take care of some of the bills. There's always something that someone can do, and being afforded the opportunity, and that's the key word, I think, the opportunity by being asked. We as human beings, we loved to be asked far more than we like to offer. But when we're asked, we feel like we're needed. And so that's sort of a ploy, a technique to use in terms of taking the onus off of you and really thinking about providing the opportunity for others to participate in the process.
There's not much more closed than a struggling caregiver. And so I think that for the caregiver to move back to the very start of this, to admit that I'm struggling. And then, some remedies for that are coffee, wine, lunch, just that first step. And I think that, but I do think that it takes the humility to say it's not working. And so how do I get back to my best self?
Right.
Exactly.
And usually that's always in community, always, right?
Yes.
And so I think that I really don't think there's any way, there's no special trick around that than just being humble enough to say, I need help. And then all of the other pieces that Nadine was speaking about really begin to take root and blossom. But until that, I don't know that it happens without that humility.
Right. I've educated, when I'm with caregivers, oftentimes when I'm doing my education classes, I suggest we always try to make things look so good, right? Everything's great.
Yeah.
How you doing? I'm great.
Yeah.
I'm fine. And so I tell them one wonderful thing, that a cold, a cough, the flu, any of those, a unfortunate fall, any of those are opportunities to reinvite family and friends back in for assistance, that things have changed.
Yes.
I know I told you that I didn't need your help before,
Exactly.
but now that this has changed, I really could use you to bring a meal or two. Start small, and then re-engaging people, I think, is really important.
Well, and I think that's well put, and the idea of developing ports of entry in our own life, for others to kind of step into, it's really difficult to do, but we're responsible for that ourselves.
So necessary. Yes.
Right.
You made a comment a little bit at a time, and I think sometimes when we talk about these collaborative teams or a care team, and sometimes caregivers are sitting there thinking, a whole herd of people are going to come through their front door and they are giving up all control. And so if you can invite them just to do it, just one thing today, just allow one person to bring you a meal and see how that feels.
Yes.
So you can just kind of wean yourself onto this idea that I don't have to do it all. And then you recognize the humility part. I can't do it all. But being that vulnerable, boy, that's hard. It's hard for me. I train on this stuff and it's hard for me.
It's very hard. And are there resources available to family and friends to help them learn about whatever challenge that this caregiver might be facing or dealing with on a day-to-day basis? In other words, if their loved one has maybe early onset dementia, and perhaps what I see a lot is someone in the caregiving position asks someone to do something, and of course, they've come over and they say, how can I help? And so then you say, well, it would be great if you cooked 2 or 3 meals. And that particular person doesn't really cook very often. Now you've put them in a position, a little bit of guilt. And so they're not going to say, well, I don't cook, right? So they're like, this helps them fade away because they're not comfortable doing what you've asked them to do. So are there organizations out there perhaps that might be able to educate them a little bit on whatever they're dealing with, like if it's dementia, if it's something specific like a Parkinson?
Absolutely. So it's, of course, my number one referral source for dementia is absolutely the Alzheimer's Association. It is just amazing in terms of the amount of education that's provided, the support that's provided. There's a 24-hour helpline that's offered, and it is a valuable resource for caregivers, for anyone dealing with anyone who has any type of dementia at all. So that's one. And then, of course, the Caregiver's Guardian is also an excellent resource. The Parkinson's Association. Depending upon whatever it is that you're dealing with, whether it's cancer, if it's stroke, Easter Still is a wonderful resource for education, information, as well as rehabilitation. So there are specific organizations that will support the caregiver, but there are also support groups that are available that I especially encourage caregivers to take advantage of.
Absolutely.
So Paul, what do you recommend when you have someone in a community and maybe they don't have a diagnosis of anything, they're just aging, and their children have moved not even away from Colorado, but kind of away from the immediate area. What would you suggest that they do about
Well,
when they're needing a little assistance?
our organization, A Little Help, some of it gets to we renamed ourselves A Little Help because it's not just caregivers who don't want to admit they need help, but no one does, right? And so
Right.
when when we're going through just a target group to figure out what to name ourselves, people kept saying, I don't need any help. Sometimes I need a little help. I said, all right, we'll be a little help. You know? And then they found another reason. No, I'm just kidding. I think that what we do is the simple parts, and we're connecting neighbors mostly in kind of a hyper-local way to where someone will pair a senior up for the winter with one of their neighbors to shovel their walk. Or to take them for a walk in the spring, or to go for a walk with them, or to go through their scrapbook, or to listen to their stories, and to help find meaning and purpose, so that it's a reciprocal friendship, rather than just a feeling of being a burden or a feeling, and so almost always when those relationships start, that resistance dissipates because it feels good. And it feels right, and it feels connected, and it's all those things. And so that's the piece that it's so simple, and it almost always works, unless a person's just determined, to not let go of whatever they're closed, whatever kind of brought them into isolation. And usually that means that we just keep chipping away.
Right. Exactly. So in a lot of cases, would you say, like in part of our survey, we asked caregivers, what is the greatest challenge for them? And Bill from Lakewood responded, like many caregivers, I think that we've all meet on a day-to-day. And again, I keep using the term caregivers because this is careful conversations for caregivers, but also just our aging community. But for caregivers, oftentimes, or those who have friends who are aging, a lot of times the fear is loss of patience. And it's not surprising because caregiving is a continuous journey, right? And there's lots of transitions and things that can happen. And caregivers in the trenches often don't recognize the sum total of those changes that are going on. And maybe they don't even understand why they're getting so much more stressed out or struggling with things. So they're reluctant again to reach out and ask for help or even understand what's going on. But as professionals in this area, what tips might you offer or assist family members that are going through this to help them see that additional help really is necessary?
I think one of the things that was mentioned earlier was the importance of a plan, creating a plan. Because the thing about caring for anyone, and I do want to offer that we are all caregivers in some form or fashion. We either have been a caregiver, will be a caregiver, are currently caring for someone, or we're going to need a caregiver. And for those of us who have raised kids, that counts as well. So we're all caregivers, and we as a society once upon a time used to operate in that vein, very much in the vein of A Little Help, where we all looked out for each other. Our neighbors we felt responsibility. Hey, I haven't seen them in a couple of days. Let me check on them. I'm going to the store. Let me offer to find out if there's anything that's needed. So the idea of caring is in fact caregiving in and of itself. So your question in regards to caregiving and the patience component of it, I think that we exercise the patience muscle by actually caring and recognizing that we are caring and we're caregiving. But the plan piece is important because there are all different facets and levels of caregiving. And when you're dealing with someone that has a chronic illness, things change. and being prepared for those changes. What that care that maybe right now the care is nominal, and I'm only requiring 4 hours of hands-on care a day. But as this disease progress, I'm going to need to look at what's going to happen when around-the-clock care is going to be required. I'm going to need help. Am I going to have help from my siblings? Am I going to have help from other family members? What are my resources? Exactly. And so that plan is imperative in terms of being able to rationally put together a plan that works and that keeps that caregiver from burning out, keeps that caregiver from leaving here before the person they're caring for.
And that goes back to your point earlier about where can we get information and education. If you don't understand the journey of Alzheimer's and what to anticipate, you aren't clairvoyant, but you have a general idea.
Exactly.
You have a general idea of Parkinson's or whatever disease process you're looking at. And so to look a little bit further down the road and to do that preparation to care sometimes will alleviate some of that loss of patience because of change fatigue. Just one change after another that was never expected, but it should have been. It could have been.
Right.
Yes.
And I think that the most successful caregivers that I've watched, we've talked about doing that in community and being open to neighbors and family and resources. But I also think that they are open to that relationship changing. That they're not stuck on this is what our relationship is and this is what our relationship will be as their loved one is their health is diminishing, or they're suffering dementia, or they're willing to mourn the relationship that was as they are kind of moving into the future of what the relationship will be in community. And when those things are paired, you watch a person that has some peace and substance and a steadiness to them that's different than a person that just is drowning because they won't reach out.
And that's that ideal model, no question about it. And I think people really struggle to get there because anticipatory grief hits you, and when it hits you, you're not ready for it because you don't even realize that you're actually grieving the loss of that relationship as it was. But as you said, as the illness progresses, things change, and as a caregiver, you have to be willing to release, to let that go and just love that person where they are at this moment in time and embrace the relationship that exists.
Which is one of the reasons why the caregiver support groups are so helpful, because you can listen to someone talking that's way down, you're in relationship with someone that's down the road from where you're at, and you're watching someone step in that's that's still blinded by the light of, so I mean, you can.
Yes.
Well, I love your description of the process that you have with a little help, because it sounded almost like an exchange of gifts, which it is.
Yeah, it is.
And so it normalizes this process of caregiving. There's not a power differential. The caregiver and then the care receiver. It's like we're on an equal footing, and I have something to offer, and you have something to offer in return. And if we can realize that it's an equal partnership, then sometimes maybe we can overcome that reluctance to ask for help and to be vulnerable, because we realize, well, I'm going to give something in return. It may not be tangible, but it's equally as valuable.
Exactly.
Giving people the opportunity to care for me.
Exactly.
Right. And receiving that. I know as a caregiver myself, I often think about my siblings who weren't really participating in the care of my parents, and the benefits that I received that they will never have. I mean, I look back on that now and I'm just so grateful for those years. And I think that, like you said earlier, it's hard to see the forest for the trees, but when you're beyond that, you look back and just see the benefits.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, there any final thoughts that you would like to offer? Words of wisdom? Nuggets?
I'm going to let you go first.
I think I always try to watch someone who's doing it well, or and that person would probably never think they're doing it well, but then to just listen to, when you were caring for your wife, tell me about that. And they'll tell you, this was the neighbor that rescued me, and this is the community of faith or the support group or the resource. I would also say that I'm so impressed with the professionals that are in this field that if you're unsure of who to call or which organization, when you call one of the organizations, they're going to point you into the other, because we are a community of caregivers.
Right.
Yeah.
And so to help, we will help you navigate that. Regardless of your question, we'll help you find someone that can point you towards some answers.
Thank you. And Nadine?
I like that. So I want to remind every caregiver that there is joy in the journey, and to daily seek the joy in the journey. That to have the honor of caring for a loved one is an honor that nothing in life will compare to. And to care for a loved one as they deal with a chronic illness, and even as they prepare to transition, because inevitably we all will. We all will. And to have someone loving, caring, appreciating the opportunity to serve and be of service there's just no greater gift. So my hat's off to every single caregiver watching. And just a reminder always to remember the joy in the journey.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I could sit here and talk to you guys all day long.
We could too.
I so enjoyed this, and thank you for providing some nuggets, because I have learned from you, and I will certainly have an enhanced journey because of our encounter. So, just a reminder in summary, we've talked about resistance to assistance, how difficult it is for all of us, whether caregivers or care receivers, to ask for help. And just to realize that there are some ways to overcome that if we choose to, and it will be to the betterment of all in that particular process. The importance of staying connected. If friends fade away, figure out a way to invite them back in, to woo them back if you need to. But we all need each other. We're relational beings, and that's so incredibly important. And then finally, the loss of patience. It's part of the journey, because there is so much change, there is so much transition, there's so much loss, as you noted, and grief that we have to process. And so I think the one word of advice I would have is just to be gentle with ourselves, because caregiving is not about perfection. We're going to make mistakes, we're going to have bad days, we're going to be snappy and snarky from time to time, and that's because we're human. But we're showing up. We're showing up. And what a calling that is. So I certainly, in closing, I would like to thank our guest for participating in our conversation today about caregiving. No doubt their comments, suggestions, and insights will prove beneficial to anyone tuning into our program today. And I certainly want to thank you for tuning in to this particular conversation, this careful conversation. And I encourage you to share this resource with other family members, friends, colleagues, clients, whoever might be interested, and that should include everyone, because caregiving is common ground, and it behooves all of us to learn more about this journey. You might even consider viewing the videos together and discussing the ideas presented. Additionally, bookmark the link to the video so you can easily refer to it at a later date. Each time you tune in, you'll hear something different based on where you are in your particular journey of caregiving. Thanks to the collaborative efforts of AARP Colorado and Dementia Friendly Denver, we enjoyed the opportunity to host 3 sessions of the roundtable rendition of Careful Conversations. We hope you find each session to be beneficial, empowering, and motivational. That is ultimately the why of our collective efforts. So take good care, and I wish you and yours many blessings on your journey of caregiving.